Hello, my name is David Moyer. I'm the Deputy Principal, Finance and Resources here at Basingstoke College of Technology. I'm also the Executive Lead for our work on anti-racism. Anti-racism for me has been about learning and understanding how racism continues to impact on the lives of our students and staff. It's helped me see issues through an alternative viewpoint and to give proper consideration to things that I really hadn't given that much attention to in the past. I've come a really long way, and I hope that through the actions we're taking here at the college, we'll have a similar experience for other people.
Welcome, David. Thank you for a really honest and really good start to our show today. All of us through this is our second season are all been on a journey, so we're joining you on that. Welcome to episode 6, season 2, anti-racism in action. Today we're focusing on Northern Ireland. My co-host today is Amajit. Amajit, I wonder if you could join us in the studio. Hey, Amajit, how are you?
Morning, Gavin. See, we're synced up today. We're looking almost.
Oh, we are being synced up. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
And today's a really interesting episode. Also, this is episode 6. Next week is also this is a bit of like the all been the giant warm up for next week for the annual conference as well. So if anyone wanted to know as well, this time next week is the BFELG annual conference, challenging the Black Paradox, 10 till 4, and check it out on the Black Leadership website, which is just below. But today it's all around Northern Ireland, and it's really interesting show. We've got two really interesting guests that we're going to bring in a little bit, but with each one of these episodes we've always set the scene, and I think it's really interesting around Northern Ireland. So if you don't mind, I won't mind sort of this going a bit Captain Stato and also going a bit backwards with what we've got around, like sort of setting the scene for everyone, because there's some very interesting stats here. So this episode 6, we've looked all around across the seasons. We've looked all around the 4 nations. I know also the conference next week is also a 4-nation conference as well with focus. Northern Ireland is very interesting. This is some stats from the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency. In March 2021, so it's very recent, Northern Ireland has a population of 1.89 million, so about 3% of the UK population. I thought that was interesting in its own right, because we looked at London a few episodes ago, 9 million people in London, and I just think that's really interesting. 98% of the Northern Ireland's population are white, and about a third of the non-white community live in Belfast. So sort of similar to what we have with the London episode, where there's a massive proportion of diversity in London, but there's still 90 languages spoken across Northern Ireland, but only doing the maths is quite simple. There's only 2% of the population are described as non-white. The largest group is people of Chinese heritage. It makes us just 0.35% of the population. Next is Indian heritage, 0.34%. Then of mixed heritage, 0.33%. Those are tiny numbers. But also, Northern Ireland has been home to diverse communities for centuries. Irish travellers are an indigenous ethnic group across all of Ireland. There has been a Jewish community for well over a century in Northern Ireland, and in the 20s and 30s, we had the Indian community start to move into Northern Ireland. Significant numbers of the Chinese community since the 60s. But Northern Ireland's been trying to adjust things. There's a lot of adjustment happening in Northern Ireland for a number of years, but there's been a legislative framework, and it's covered by a Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 98. And this is a racial equality strategy for 2015 to 2025. So we're coming to the close of this. And a part of the framework for addressing these challenges and building on opportunities, part of the government vision is, and I want to quote this, is a society which is strengthened by its ethnic diversity, where we can live together free from racism, racial inequality, unlawful racial discrimination, where we can share a common sense of belonging, and where human rights and equality are enjoyed by all. We've got 3 years left to go for this 10-year strategy. So I think one of the big questions we might want to ask a bit later is, how far has Northern Ireland come to achieve this intent and strategy, which I'm sure we're going to cover later on today. So that's sort of setting the scene. It's an interesting show. I don't know what you sort of you've been working with a number of different college leaders and different groups within Northern Ireland for a while now, MJ. How are you sort of seeing the Northern Ireland scene when it comes to anti-racism in action?
I think, first of all, thanks for that backdrop, Gavin. One of the things which sort of resonates for me is, and you mentioned the strategy, that alongside Northern Ireland, in some cases, it's the devolved nations that have the greatest ambition with regards to addressing race equality. It's a bit of a paradox, really, as you said, with the conference in mind next week. And your point about the size of the population in London, in England, that the devolved nations appear to have the greatest appetite with regards to addressing. So it'd be really useful to hear the two speakers' perspective on that. The second thing is that it's probably about 10 years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland colleges, including Louise's college, who's one of our guests today. And the stats are one thing, but actually it's the engagement of the communities, which is absolutely key and fundamental. And it was just great to see some of the inclusion work that was going on about 10 years ago. So it'd be really great to be brought up to speed on that this morning.
Yeah, I've heard so many cool things about Northern Ireland, the way that education and skills is being used to be inclusive, to be able to bring everyone together across race, across everything which has been going on in Northern Ireland for a very long time now. And it'll be really, really cool to bring in our two guests. So we've got Louise from Belfast Met. We've got Laurie from Join Her Network. Laurie, Louise, I wonder if you could join us in the studio. Hey, Laurie. Hey, Louise. How are you?
Hi, Gavin. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to have you here.
Thank you.
Amjad, I know that you know Louise from a while ago. So I didn't know if you wanted to kick off with Louise today.
Brilliant. Yeah, very happy to. Morning, Louise. Great to see you again. So I've got an opening question, Louise, is given the context that we're here today, what changes have you observed in society in Northern Ireland with regards to race equality over a period of time?
Well, for me, I'm born and raised in Northern Ireland, but spent many years away living and working in England. And two things, as I cast my mind back, the first thing is the very obvious thing is visibility, the visibility of the Black community. And I use that term in the same way that you do, to encompass ethnic communities spanning more than simply sort of African or Afro-Caribbean. And when I was a wee kid growing up in the 60s in Belfast, you rarely saw a Black face. You'd only have seen over in the south end of Belfast, near the university, or in the hospitals. So that shows you that was it was almost location specific or institution specific. And when I came back from London, I lived in Tottenham and London for a lot of years, to Belfast 30 years ago. I still was hit by the sort of, it was almost as if we'd gone from full cinematic Panavision colour to sepia tint, because our community looked anemic, and we had so few. Again, we had so few Black people at that time around. So that there was a real bit about the visibility of moving from a very vibrant multicultural place like London back home. But I have to say, over the past 30 years, that has changed. And you reference, I think, Gavin, that, you know, in our very small population, 1.8 or so million people, that just under 2% of our community are Black and minority ethnic community. And we're going to have the census done again. So that goes back to the last census. The census is coming up this year, and we fully expect that to change. So what's interesting for me working as a college leader is, and particularly in the Belfast metropolitan area, is that, and some of the work I'm leading with the other 5 colleges across Northern Ireland, is about an examination of what is going on in our college communities. And certainly Belfast Met, we have around about 8.1% of our students come from the Black communities, and yet we as a staff are not reflective of we're whiter than the general population. So there's a big issue for me, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit further, about how do we take the continuing and very exciting to my mind development of our society. How do we really make it inclusive? And actually, while we have the great piece that you talked about, Gavin, you talked about, the strategies that are there. Actually, for me, you have to start where you're at. You have to start on your own home turf, in your own institution, to say, brilliant, love the strategy, but actually, what are we doing, and how are we making our colleges welcoming places? And one really important thing to say is that the young Black community is larger, it proportionately. There's a the under 16s, and indeed by immigration the under 25s, they proportionately emerge in higher numbers. So there is something particularly, I think, an onus around schools, colleges and universities to be very appreciative that we need to make our institutions welcoming, inclusive, and walk the talk.
Thanks for that, Louise. Just a couple of follow-ups there, and I pick up the point about visibility and volume, the size, proportions, and so on. Do you think Northern Ireland as a society 10, 20 years on is more inclusive for people from ethnic minority backgrounds?
Well, I think we do a thing every year called the Life and Times survey, and these questions come up, and we're able to monitor it. And that regrettably, I don't think that we are moving as swiftly to being an inclusive society as we would wish. And by that I mean that when you sort of check in with the figures sort of 5 years back, the changes and the attitudinal changes in society are not coming forward as quickly perhaps as those of us who would aspire to see it move faster would wish. There are some very strong reasons, I think, for that. I used to work many years ago when I was in education, the Department of Education, as a civil servant. I led on community relations and good relations. And one thing that you have to understand is that we had practiced our muscle here. We developed a muscle here about othering. And we, as you know, a society that forged in conflict for many years. And othering and difference was to be, in a way, recognised and occasionally feared rather than embraced and celebrated. And I've often said that sectarianism and racism are two sides of the one coin. So we still have a journey of travel here in Northern Ireland. I think what absolutely relentlessly gives me hope is the commitment of our young people, and it's young people's attitudes who will help do it, as opposed to people, I have to say, of my generation. But we're in the influencing roles now, we're in the decision-making roles. We need to make that environment as positive as we can for our young people.
And you mentioned the importance of starting that within your own organisation, your own backyard, with young people, attitudinal.
Yep.
How's that work gone on in your own organisation?
Well, Belfast Met's been we're very proud to be a college of sanctuary, by the way, I think we're one of the only ones on the island of Ireland. So I think we have a good reputation in terms of wanting to be welcoming and inclusive and appreciative of difference. However, since I got involved with you, Amarjeet, and Stella and others, there's a power about making a movement for us as 6 colleges across Northern Ireland. So what I've been focusing on is working with an intra-college group, moving across all the 6 colleges to orient, gathering the evidence, gathering the data, and actually and we're about to do a student survey to understand how our students across all 6 colleges are experiencing these issues. And from that, I think we will then be able to identify how we, working with the BFELG, we're looking at how we can then turbocharge our commitment in this area. One final thing, we're just past International Women's Day just the other day. I did a lot of work back in the day in the Northern Ireland Civil Service around women and about breaking down the barriers for women. And I saw that although that was a focus on women, actually it unleashed our ability to think about marginalised groups and difference in a very different way. So it became the rising tide. I think for us, focusing on racism and institutional racism and issues of difference and diversity for Black and minority ethnic community members and learners is a way of really focusing. And I don't doubt it will have benefits, not just for that, but for colleges on diversity more widely.
Louise, Laurie, I want to bring you in just for a second. I think you said some really, really interesting points there. So, Belfast Met being a place of sanctuary. What an interesting sort of thought process around what we could be thinking around education and being place-based and where we can incorporate everyone in. I think sectarianism and racism being at two sides of the same coin, very, 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 very interesting. And particularly, Northern Ireland has gone through such fundamental shifts to better address this and make change. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. And also, I think it's interesting the way that you talked around for Europe. We've had a bit of a Tottenham thing going on through this season, to be honest with you. I'm a North London boy myself, so I think it's interesting of where you sort of had the experience of London and so on. Well, glad I gave that stat now. And then what you're talking about, what you're experiencing in Northern Ireland. Laurie, you've been incredibly patient, 17 minutes, and you've been so patient. I wondered if I could bring you in around some of the stuff that Louise has covered there. I think was very interesting, but also what could be the benefits of an anti-racism in action versus a not racist approach to Northern Ireland. I wonder if we could sort of incorporate some of the stuff Louise covered, but wrapping it around that as well.
Well, Gavin, just to add to that, for me, anti-racism in action, in my opinion, that is. So, where we can acknowledge the forms and the presence of racism, we actively become more aware. We become more conscious of how not to deny or sideline the obvious signs of racism. Because when you're anti-racism in action, you're consciously making that effort to not deny the truth, but to be able to embrace it and action it and put a plan into place. Because a lot of times what happens is we say all of these things, we see a lot of these things, and those obvious signs become silenced. Something else steps in and the volume is raised and we start focusing on those things. We need to be more intentional about the change, especially from a systematic point of view, acknowledging the inequalities, the disparities, and we also become more equitable and inclusive. That's naturally what happens because I become more aware of what the challenges are for my colleagues, what the challenges are for the people in my work environment, for the people in my community. How do we become blended if we're not willing to take time to consider each other differently? Now, on the flip side, on a not racist approach, we're simply denying the obvious things. And we continue to be oblivious to all the signs that oppress so many. Through that ignorance, we keep holding on to, well, it's okay, the microaggressions, all those silent tendencies that continue to silence people who are equally part of our community, who can make that change. We end up looking at things like a skills gap. We end up not tapping into those resources because it's through those diverse ethnic communities that we empower everything about us, economically, socially, health, education. And that's the tool. So being more anti-racist, I think, is the better approach. Not racist, it's an easy cop-out. And after all, I think the expression is denial is in Egypt, so we won't do that. We're not going to do
that. Good point. I think to both of you, Louise and Laurie, but Laurie, I would like to sort of continue with you on this really. Having action, being anti-racist, having a purpose, being very, very driven to be able to, to sort of eradicate I think is a really interesting point. But how do we have individual and collective responsibility in our everyday to make anti-racism a priority that impacts everyone? And I think one thing that Louise really said really struck me. I was trying to think how to frame this before, but you hit it on the head for me, Louise, is you've been through such monumental effort around sectarianism. How can we then address all of those lessons learned to looking now at anti-racism? Laurie, I wonder if you could kick us off with that.
Well, for me, the more educated we become, and it's not just from a textbook perspective, and it's not just us empathizing, because there's more to it than that. We have to speak out, we have to call things out, we have to go against the grain, and that is not popular. We have to be intentional about creating that change, and then it becomes contagious because we all have a duty of care to be doing something. This is individually and also collectively. So when we can all do this together, then it makes impact with our community. I mean, we've all heard the expression, change the way you think and how you look at things will change. If we're looking at being an anti-racism and action approach as an individual and as a community, obviously how we deal with our colleagues becomes different. And Louise was saying that there's a visibility piece. It stops being about my ethnicity, but about acknowledging me as an individual, as a person. We eradicate the whole idea of biases and stereotypes because I'm just Laurie right now. My ethnicity doesn't matter. It's me as a person and absorbing all of that of an individual and also including them in the conversation. And I think that's where we need to be. If we start to make those steps, go and educate ourselves, go and do what we need to do at an individual level. Don't be afraid to be the odd person who says, no, that's not an appropriate action. Walk across a colleague in the staff canteen room who's on their own because they look different. Looking different is the whole essence of life. Variety is the spice of life, right? So I don't want to sit every day with myself. Ideally, I want to be interacting with others who challenge me, who motivate me, who make me aspire for better. And I think that's what we're trying to do within our community. So if we can keep doing that, I would love to have the day where you can have all of us just appreciate the values of us as individuals and then as a collective. Because after all, that's how diversity is strengthened. I mean, companies are making millions as a result of diversity. Technology is updated every 6 months. So how difficult is it for us as humanity to every so often upload new software? Because we need it. It makes a difference in our interactions and how we can be better as societies and individuals. So yes, we should make that effort. We can do it. Sometimes it's harder. It's not popular, but that's the best thing to do because it becomes the example. You become the template, whether it's in your office, whether it's in your organization. When you're an anti-racism and action person, you become the template that policies are changed. The way of life has changed. How we are sitting here today, I hope in the next couple of years we will sit here and have other conversations because anti-racism and every ism that is out there in the world is eradicated because we have new words and a new approach. At least that's what I think we could do.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's really cool, Laurie. Louise, I wonder if I could ask the same question of you. Particularly, I really would love to explore what you're saying on the looking at that coin, sectarianism, racism, same side of the coin. So much has been, as effort has gone into addressing sectarianism. What can we also learn in Northern Ireland around how we can sort of those lessons learned, things we could take forward with also taking action against anti-racism as well?
Well, I think there's a fundamental thing. No one is born sectarian. No one is born racist. These are cultural mores which are learned through the families and the communities that shape you, and from that point of view, I would echo what Laurie has said, which is that education is at the heart of this. Education is fundamental. There's a great saying attributed, I believe, to Derek Bok, which is, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And I think that's a cracking one. I think Derek Bok has worked at Harvard. Anyway, I hang on to that phrase because I think there's lots of different ways of educating. There's our formal education in our schools, our non-formal through youth and so forth, and through community education as well. And at the heart of it, for me, I suppose there is an issue around confidence. There is a piece about being confident in your own identity, including cultural identity as well. And these are things which in the society that is Northern Ireland, which has emerged uneasily into peace over a number of years, but where conflict I mean, the state was born in conflict. The state of Northern Ireland was born in conflict 100 years ago, and that where you have that, of course, it permeates identity, it permeates culture, it permeates the issue of protecting what we have. I think, and that is, I believe that is part of the psyche as underpinning cultural identities here, helping people transcend that through being more confident in their own identity, and then confident and welcoming of the identities of other is really, I feel, very strongly echoing what Laurie has said. And that's the bit for me about, if you can exercise a muscle both ways. You can exercise the muscle, in the less positive ways, but you can also exercise the muscle in a positive way, which is where looking at how do you break down sectarianism and how do you break down racism are akin, because all of that has at the heart of it the tenets of building good relations. All of it is about building good relations, and good relations is not some attempt at homogeneity, which has sometimes been said by pundits. Oh, but you're just going to make us all, all the same. Not at all. I think, as Laurie said, it is the glory of our individual human existence that we are individuals, and for me, therefore, particularly giving young people opportunities to engage with each other from different backgrounds and different walks of life, and it is really important. One quick stat which came from the 2019 Young Life and Times survey is that nearly 45% of young people, and these are young people who are in schools, had witnessed a racist bullying in schools. So, I mean, that shows you the journey that we are on, that if that is what our young people, those who responded, said, and nearly half of those who responded, the Young Life Times said that, I mean, that clearly is, we have a bit of a hill to climb, but we're optimistic. We must be optimistic. And I think that, in fact, I think we have a moral responsibility to be optimistic and to believe that we can affect the change we want to see, as Laurie said so beautifully.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. We're nearly out of time, but I want to ask everyone a question which you've asked on every single one of the episodes and every single one of the seasons. If you could dream and dream big, what would you want to see for anti-racism in action in Northern Ireland? Laurie, what would you want to see?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of going to go back into the archives here and look at the late, great Dr. Martin Luther, his famous speech, I have a dream. Today, that same dream is yet to be fully embraced. I believe that we all can make the real positive changes that will profoundly not only change me as an individual, but change us as a collective. And I think while we're all pursuing this pursuit of happiness in whatever definition that is, we need to be different about how we look at each other, how we value the inclusive and diverse approaches. I Have a Dream was so relevant then and is relevant today. I mean, I sit here and across from me is Louise. This year's International Women's Day theme is Break the Bias. We can sit here and as women, we can talk about the challenges, the experiences from a cultural perspective, from a professional. And it has nothing to do with our ethnicity, but there's an admiration and appreciation of each other as colleagues and each other as women who are making impact in our communities. So that same dream supersedes my seeing Louise and her ethnicity. I just see Louise. And likewise, she sees me. So that's what we want to do. That's my dream. When it's all about, hi, Gavin, hi, Armton. And it's got nothing to do with who you are visibly to me, but about everything about who you are as a person that I can appreciate and make that part and parcel of my blended community of individuals who impact not just me, but the world as a whole. So that's my dream.
Yeah, good dream, Laurie. good dream. Louise, what would you want to see?
I think I'm in an era of just had a recent birthday, and I'm in a moment of introspection. I would wish the gift of all of our 1.8 plus million people in Northern Ireland being able to look inwards and ask themselves, why are they? We carry bias within us, we carry prejudice within us, even if it's unconscious. I would love the gift of introspection so that people can ask themselves why, and work through that, because I think this is these regrettably, and particularly I think for the older generation, this has been what they've been socialized with, and in many ways. And actually, if every one of us could examine our own conscience about it, I think we could begin to make that change. Because for me, it starts with me, with my colleagues, with my family, and out and out and out you go. So be the pebble, be the conscious pebble that makes the ripple for good.
Yeah, really love that, Louise. Being the pebble for good. I absolutely love that. Amajit, if you could dream and dream big, what would you want to see for anti-racism and action in Northern Ireland?
I'm just going to go with my instinct here. When Laurie and Louise spoke, and especially Louise in that last remark, just the gift of self-reflection, and the ability to ask the question why. Serendipity came to my mind. And that's a spoiler, Gavin, which is, Louise, you don't know the big spoiler you've done for next week's signature conference, which just absolutely resonates with that. So I'm just going to leave that as a little bit of a thought. The serendipity, I think, is critical for us getting into a better world. And wait till this time next week.
Well, there goes the banner to remind everyone to go for it. I'll get told off if I avoid the dream big. For me, I think it was some really, really good, interesting points from Laurie and Louise, which I'm going to magnify. And I think is we just everyone can appreciate everyone's individuality. We're individuals. That's what makes us unique and interesting. You know, it's all of our different lived experiences and how we can come together. But I think Louise has done an absolutely brilliant point, and I don't know if this is in the event next week, but that pebble moment I think is beautiful. Now, what a beautiful imagery we can use there around how we can be introspective and look at ourselves, but how we can then make impactful change to everyone around us in our immediate community. I love that, and I'd love to see that in me and in everyone else around us. The show is I've completely run over. I just got a bit sort of taken over by the pebble and the introspective, and I just think this is a really, really interesting show. I think Northern Ireland it's got such opportunity. It's gone through such transformational change. I love that idea of sanctuary in Belfast Met. How can we deliver sanctuary in every educational establishment in the UK? And how can we all learn from that to be able to then come together, to be able to accept individuals, to have the pebble moments? Do you know what I mean? I love that. So next week, I just flicked up the banner. I got a bit put off by Amajit with serendipity. But next week is the conference, 10 till 4, 16th of March, challenging the Black Paradox. Week after, we're going to be reflecting on the conference as well. See you all really soon. Really loved today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And see you at the conference next week.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
conference.
you.